It was a bright, sunny morning when the CEO stepped out of her sleek black car and walked toward the bank. She was dressed sharply in a tailored suit, her presence commanding attention without any effort. People on the sidewalk barely noticed her, but inside the bank, she knew her reputation often preceded her. As one of the most respected leaders in her industry, she had spent years building her company from the ground up, turning it into a successful enterprise admired by peers and competitors alike. Yet, despite all her achievements, she was just like any other person stepping into a bank for a routine transaction, unaware that today would be unlike any other. The bank itself looked impressive from the outside, with polished glass doors and a neatly trimmed lawn. It was the kind of branch that promised efficiency and professionalism. A sign with the bank's logo glimmered under the morning sun, and the automatic doors opened smoothly as she approached. Inside, the atmosphere was calm, almost serene, with soft music playing in the background and tellers quietly attending to customers. Everything seemed normal, even welcoming, and she felt confident that her visit would be simple and quick. She had a meeting later in the day and only needed to handle a few important financial tasks before heading to the office. As she walked toward the counter, she noticed a few other customers waiting patiently. Their expressions showed a mix of curiosity and indifference. She was used to being in public spaces, but today, she felt a subtle tension in the air, something she couldn't quite identify at first. Perhaps it was just the usual busy atmosphere of a bank, she thought. Shaking off the uneasy feeling, she approached the teller with a warm smile, expecting the interaction to be courteous and professional. After all, she had done business with countless banks over the years, and this branch had always seemed reliable from the outside. She greeted the teller politely and prepared her documents. Everything should have gone smoothly, as it had countless times before, but there was something different about the way the staff looked at her, something unspoken and uncomfortable. The teller hesitated, glancing at her paperwork and then back at her face. The CEO, noticing the hesitation, assumed it was standard procedure. Maybe they needed additional verification or identification. She waited patiently, maintaining her usual composure, confident that the minor delay would be resolved quickly. While she stood there, she observed her surroundings more closely, taking in the details that most people overlooked. The chairs were neatly arranged, the floor was spotless, and the lighting was bright yet welcoming. There were framed pictures on the walls, displaying smiling families and successful clients. All of it painted the picture of a bank that valued professionalism and client satisfaction. Yet, beneath the polished surface, there was an undercurrent she could feel but not yet name, a subtle tension that made her instincts tingle. She thought about the countless meetings, presentations, and negotiations she had led in her career. None of them had ever left her feeling uncertain about herself or her authority. She had faced boardroom challenges, hostile competitors, and difficult employees, yet she had always walked away with her confidence intact. Today, though, something about this routine visit felt strangely different, almost like stepping onto unfamiliar ground. She had learned early in her life that first impressions mattered, but equally important was the ability to sense when a situation required caution and awareness. As she prepared to speak to the teller, she noticed the slight shift in body language, a subtle stiffness that had not been there when she first entered. She could see it in the way the staff moved, the way their eyes flickered briefly before looking away. It was a small detail, but in her experience, small details often revealed bigger truths. The CEO took a deep breath, reminding herself to stay calm and composed. She was here for business, and she would not let anything distract her from her purpose. Little did she know, the ordinary morning and the routine bank visit were about to turn into a defining moment, one that would test her patience, her leadership, and her ability to handle discrimination in real time. She handed over her documents and waited, expecting professional service as any client deserved. Yet, a strange silence hung in the air, one that made her pause and take notice. Something about this day was unusual, something that would soon escalate beyond a simple banking transaction. In that quiet moment, as she stood poised and ready, the CEO's mind began to race through possible scenarios, never imagining that what happened next would become a story talked about across the country, a story about courage, accountability, and standing up for oneself when faced with unfair treatment. She had barely settled in at the counter when she felt it, a sudden shift in energy that made her pause. The teller, a young man with a neatly pressed uniform, was scanning her documents with unusual hesitation. His eyes flicked up occasionally, but instead of offering the usual professional smile, there was a faint frown, a subtle tightening of his jaw that spoke louder than words. The CEO, experienced in reading people, immediately sensed that something was off, but she gave him the benefit of the doubt, assuming it was just a slow moment in the morning routine. "Good morning," she said warmly, her tone calm and professional. "I'm here to complete a few transactions." The teller looked at her, blinked, and then slowly shook his head. "I'm sorry, ma'am. We can't assist you today," he said, almost mechanically, as if reading from a script. The words hit her like a cold wave, leaving her momentarily speechless. She glanced around, expecting someone, another staff member, a manager, even a fellow customer, to step in, but the silence in the branch was almost suffocating. Her mind raced, trying to understand what had just happened. Refused service. At this branch? To her. It seemed impossible, surreal, yet the expression on the teller's face left no room for misinterpretation. She noticed the subtle glances exchanged between the staff behind the counter, tiny gestures that hinted at discomfort, uncertainty, or perhaps unspoken bias. The CEO, who had faced countless boardroom challenges and high-pressure negotiations, suddenly felt the sting of humiliation, a rare emotion for someone usually so composed. She steadied herself, reminding her mind and body to stay calm. There was a difference between reacting impulsively and responding strategically. She knew that how she handled this moment would define not just her day but also set an example of leadership under pressure. She asked politely, "I don't understand. Could you explain why I can't be assisted?" The teller's eyes darted down to her paperwork again, avoiding direct contact. "It's policy," he mumbled. "We're unable to serve you at this time." His words were curt, dismissive, and chillingly vague. For a moment, she considered leaving, walking out, ignoring the injustice, but something inside her stirred, a quiet, fierce determination that refused to be silenced. She had built a company from nothing, faced setbacks, and broken barriers in industries dominated by others. She was not going to accept being dismissed, overlooked, or discriminated against. Not here, not today, not silently. She leaned slightly forward, her voice firm yet calm. "I've been a client of this bank before. I've conducted transactions without issue. I expect the same respect and service as any other customer." The teller hesitated, glancing at his colleagues, who whispered among themselves, avoiding her gaze. The CEO noticed the tension in the room, the awkward energy that now surrounded the counter. It was as if her mere presence had unsettled the branch, a stark reminder of how bias can linger in the most mundane places. She realized that this was bigger than a single transaction. It was a reflection of attitudes that existed quietly behind smiles and polite greetings, a reminder that even in professional spaces, equality and respect could never be taken for granted. A few other customers had started to notice the unusual interaction, their curious eyes flicking between her and the teller. Some appeared uncomfortable, some indifferent, but none intervened. It was one of those rare moments when injustice feels both personal and public, when standing up is necessary not only for oneself but also as a statement to others witnessing the situation. She could feel her pulse quicken, not with anger, but with resolve. Every second she waited, the stakes grew higher. Not just for her, but for the principle of fairness itself. Finally, she spoke again, her voice calm but laced with authority. "I will not leave until this is resolved. I deserve to be treated with professionalism and respect, just as you expect your clients to be." The teller shifted uncomfortably, mumbling something about calling a manager, but the CEO knew this was more than a managerial issue. This was a moment that demanded accountability, clarity, and immediate action. The denial of service, however brief, had revealed the true character of the branch, and she was not about to let it slide. In that instant, the ordinary banking routine transformed into a defining moment. She was no longer just a client, she was a leader confronting injustice, a leader who understood that courage isn't always about grand gestures, but sometimes about standing firm when the world seems ready to dismiss you. This small branch, with its polished floors and neat counters, had become the stage for a lesson in dignity, power, and the quiet, undeniable force of someone who refuses to be marginalized. The CEO stood there for a moment, stunned, the teller's words echoing in her mind like a discordant note in an otherwise familiar melody. She had been refused service, not because of a missing document, not due to a procedural hiccup, but because of something unspoken, something deeper, something that unsettled her in a way few things ever had. Her first instinct was disbelief. A natural human reaction to the unexpected, the polite rhythm of the bank, the soft hum of air conditioning, and the quiet chatter of other customers suddenly felt like a backdrop to a surreal scene, as if time itself had slowed down. She took a deep breath, trying to steady the subtle spike of adrenaline running through her body. In her years of leadership, she had faced crises, boardroom betrayals, client losses, high-pressure deadlines, but none of these had left her feeling the sharp sting of personal dismissal in such an immediate and public way. Her mind raced to process what had just happened, running through questions. Why now? Why here? What prompted this behavior? And most importantly, how should she respond without compromising her composure or authority? Around her, the branch seemed normal, almost serene, as though nothing unusual had occurred, but she could feel the weight of judgment, the quiet whispers behind counters, the way the staff avoided her gaze. The CEO realized that this silence was not neutral. It carried an invisible tension, a reflection of discomfort and perhaps guilt. The realization hit her. The incident was not just a personal affront. It was a window into systemic issues she had long known existed but rarely encountered so directly in a professional setting. For a moment, she allowed herself a brief pause, letting the shock settle before moving into action. It was critical to stay calm, to observe, to understand before reacting. She reminded herself that true leadership is measured not by immediate emotions, but by thoughtful responses. She adjusted her posture, straightening her shoulders, letting her presence fill the small space. She would not appear intimidated, nor would she allow the subtle humiliation to undermine her confidence. Her eyes scanned the room, noticing subtle details she had missed before, the hesitant glances of a customer waiting in line, the slight stiffening of the teller's posture, the small gestures exchanged among staff that hinted at unspoken tension. Every detail was telling a story, and she knew how to read it. This was a test, not of her skills in business or strategy, but of her patience, her composure, and her ability to handle discrimination with dignity and intelligence. Internally, a storm brewed, a mix of frustration, disbelief, and quiet rage, yet she channeled it into clarity, breaking it down into manageable thoughts. She reminded herself that reacting impulsively would give them control, but responding strategically would give her power. The CEO had learned early in life that composure in the face of unfair treatment was not weakness, but a tool, a lever to assert authority and demand accountability without losing moral ground. She also considered the larger implications, thinking beyond the immediate moment. This was more than a single transaction. It was a reflection of systemic biases that could impact countless others. By handling it with grace and firmness, she could turn a personal affront into a lesson in accountability and respect. The shock she felt was real, but it was also fuel for action, igniting a determination to ensure that no one else would face such disrespect without consequence. As minutes passed, the CEO felt the shift within herself, from surprise to focus, from shock to strategy. She began planning her next steps, mentally outlining how she would address the branch staff, how she would ensure accountability, and how she would transform this moment of humiliation into a powerful lesson in leadership. Her calm exterior belied the storm of thoughts within, a quiet confidence forming that she would not leave the situation unresolved. Finally, she took a deep breath, letting the tension in her body ease just enough to project authority. She had regained control over her emotions, and in doing so, had silently sent a message to everyone in the room. She was not intimidated, she was not powerless, and she would act decisively. She knew that the true test of her leadership was about to unfold in the next few moments, as she prepared to turn a moment of shock into a moment of empowerment. The CEO took a slow, deliberate breath, feeling the weight of the moment settle on her shoulders. The initial shock had passed, and now a new, sharper emotion took its place, determination. She straightened her back, squared her shoulders, and stepped slightly closer to the counter, her gaze steady and unflinching. It was time to speak, not with anger or accusation, but with clarity, authority, and purpose. She knew that how she chose her words now would define the entire encounter, not just for herself but for everyone in the branch. "Excuse me," she began, her voice calm but firm, carrying the confidence of someone used to commanding rooms full of people. "I was just told that I cannot be assisted here today." I need to understand why." The teller's eyes darted away, avoiding hers, his hands fidgeting with the paperwork as if it could somehow erase the moment. She could feel the tension in the air, the quiet whispers from colleagues, the shifting of feet from nearby customers, everyone sensing the confrontation about to unfold. She waited patiently, giving him a chance to respond, but the words never came clearly, only hesitation, a mumbled reference to policy that lacked explanation or justification. The CEO tilted her head slightly, signaling both curiosity and insistence. "Policy," she repeated softly, almost questioning, yet every word carried weight, authority, and expectation. "Which policy exactly? And why does it prevent me from being served? I have been a client of this bank, conducted transactions here before without any issues, and I expect the same professionalism now." The teller swallowed nervously, glancing at his colleagues, who were shifting uneasily, whispering to each other, clearly uncomfortable under her unwavering gaze. The CEO realized that she was no longer just dealing with one employee, she was addressing a system, a culture, a mindset that allowed such an incident to occur. Her mind raced, analyzing every detail, the stammering of the staff, the slight frown of the branch manager observing from afar, the subtle discomfort of other tellers. Every gesture, every hesitation told her that she was exposing something larger than herself, a reflection of bias and poor judgment that demanded accountability. She took a measured step forward, her tone calm but unwavering. "I am not leaving until I understand why this is happening," she said, her voice carrying through the room, drawing the attention of everyone present. Even the customers who had been quietly observing now watched, sensing that this was no ordinary banking dispute. She maintained her composure, letting the tension build not as intimidation, but as a silent assertion of her authority. She would not allow frustration or anger to cloud the clarity of her message. Her eyes met those of the branch manager, a silent challenge forming in her gaze. The unspoken message was clear: accountability starts now, and no polite excuse would suffice. The CEO continued, her words deliberate, precise. "I am asking for clarity, respect, and professionalism, not just for myself, but for anyone who might come here expecting fair treatment." The air felt heavy with expectation, the silence pressing down on the room, yet she remained calm, a pillar of authority and control. In the midst of discomfort, a moment passed, stretching just long enough for her presence and determination to settle over the staff like a spotlight. The teller fumbled again, offering vague references to management and procedures, but the CEO was already thinking ahead, mentally preparing to escalate the situation if necessary. She understood the importance of using this confrontation strategically, turning it from a personal affront into an opportunity to demonstrate leadership, accountability, and unwavering standards. Finally, she leaned slightly forward, her voice calm yet edged with authority. "I will not accept being dismissed without reason. I expect immediate action and a clear explanation, or I will escalate this matter myself." Every word landed with weight, making it impossible for anyone in the branch to ignore. In that moment, the CEO was no longer just a client, she was a leader confronting injustice, demanding recognition and respect, and silently reminding everyone present that leadership is not only about power but also about courage and accountability. The room seemed to hold its breath, caught between tension and anticipation. The teller, clearly flustered, picked up the phone hesitantly, signaling a call to higher management, but the CEO already knew that this confrontation would not end quietly. This was the turning point, the moment when ordinary circumstances collided with extraordinary resolve, and the consequences for the branch staff were about to unfold. The CEO stood there, poised and calm, her mind racing yet fully in control. The refusal of service had been a jolt, the confrontation had been tense, but now she reached a critical moment, a turning point where thought met action. She realized that waiting for an apology, hoping for understanding, or leaving the situation unresolved was not an option. Leadership, she knew, was not measured by how one reacted to success, but by how decisively one acted in the face of injustice. Her eyes scanned the branch, taking in every detail, the uncomfortable posture of the teller, the hushed whispers of staff, the distant glance of the manager trying to avoid confrontation. Every subtle signal reinforced the same truth: this was a systemic problem masked as an isolated incident, and leaving it unaddressed would allow it to continue, not just for her, but for anyone who might walk through these doors in the future. She took a deep breath, centering herself, feeling the surge of Authority that came from clarity of purpose. She recalled every challenge she had faced in her career, the times when competitors had underestimated her, when board members had doubted her decisions, when employees had tested her patience. In every instance, the key had been decisive action, not hesitation, not anger, not regret. She knew that the branch staff needed more than an explanation, they needed accountability. She had been calm, composed, and professional so far, but now it was time for action. Her fingers tapped lightly against the counter as she formulated her plan. The decision was clear. She could not allow those responsible for this refusal to continue representing the bank. Their behavior reflected poorly on the institution, and tolerating it would condone bias and unprofessionalism. She thought of the message she wanted to send, not just to this branch, but to everyone watching. Everything she did would demonstrate that unfair treatment had consequences, and leadership required courage to act decisively. She looked at the teller again, his discomfort palpable, and then at the manager, who was now fully aware of the seriousness of the situation. The CEO's presence was magnetic, commanding attention without force. She spoke quietly but firmly. I expected professionalism, and I will not accept anything less. This is not about confrontation, this is about accountability, ethics, and fairness. Her words hung in the air, carrying weight, precision, and authority, forcing everyone in the branch to recognize the gravity of the moment. The decision crystallized in her mind like a steel rod. Within minutes, she would make it clear that behavior like this could not and would not be tolerated. She didn't need to shout, threaten, or demand. Her authority and reputation did all the work. The bank staff, once comfortable in their routine, now felt the power of someone who had built an empire from determination and vision. Someone who understood that leadership wasn't just about business strategy, but about standing up for what was right, even when it was inconvenient. Her internal dialogue was precise, calculated, and unwavering. Every step, every action was measured. She imagined the conversation she would have with the regional management, how she would explain the incident, how she would demand accountability, how she would ensure that this moment became an example rather than a hidden failure. She knew the exact outcome she wanted. The staff responsible needed to be held accountable immediately, no delays, no excuses. In that quiet moment, she felt an immense sense of control, a feeling that only comes from aligning intention with action. She was no longer a passive participant in this narrative. She was shaping it, directing it, turning a moment of personal affront into a decisive demonstration of leadership. The choice was hers, and she would wield it with precision, clarity, and courage. The realization brought a calm satisfaction, the kind that comes when one knows exactly what must be done and refuses to hesitate. With resolve settling into her bones, she spoke one last time to the teller and the observing staff. I will escalate this matter, and I will ensure accountability. This isn't just about me, it's about ensuring respect and fairness for everyone who comes through these doors. Her words were not loud, but they resonated with authority, professionalism, and unwavering determination, signaling that the decision had been made, and the consequences were about to follow. At that moment, she felt the extraordinary power of decisive leadership. The ordinary morning had transformed into a defining moment, one where clarity, courage, and action converged. She had moved from shock and confrontation to a place of complete control, ready to execute a decision that would echo far beyond the walls of that small bank branch. The stage was set, and the next chapter, the execution of her decision, was about to unfold. The CEO didn't wait. In her mind, hesitation would only give the branch staff more time to justify behavior that was inexcusable. She picked up her phone with calm precision and dialed the regional manager directly, her fingers steady, her voice composed. This is CEO's name, she began, her tone polite but sharp. I need to report an incident at your branch, and it requires immediate attention. There was no room for debate, no room for deflection. Every word she spoke carried authority, earned through years of building her empire and navigating challenges far greater than this. As she described the incident, she maintained a steady, unwavering presence, ensuring that nothing she said could be twisted or minimized. She detailed how she had been refused service, how the teller and branch staff had treated her unprofessionally, and how the situation reflected both poor judgment and systemic negligence. The regional manager listened carefully, sensing the gravity of the moment. The weight of her words like a gavel hitting the table, every syllable was deliberate, measured. and full of intent, signaling that she expected immediate action. Within minutes, she could feel the tension in the branch shift. The staff who had moments ago appeared so confident now fidgeted nervously, exchanging uneasy glances. The CEO's calm authority filled the room, leaving no doubt that accountability was coming. She had already envisioned the consequences, and now, the execution of her decision was underway. The silence was thick, charged with anticipation, as if the branch itself recognized that a line had been crossed, and it could never be uncrossed. The regional manager confirmed that they were taking her complaints seriously, and she laid out her expectations clearly. The CEO insisted that the entire branch team responsible for the incident be held accountable immediately, emphasizing that bias and unprofessional behavior could not be tolerated. Her words were firm yet professional, a perfect balance of authority and composure. The staff could feel the weight of her presence and influence, the kind of weight that comes from someone who has the power and the resolve to act without hesitation. As the call ended, the CEO didn't lower her head or relax her posture. She maintained her commanding presence, letting the staff absorb the reality that their actions had consequences. Immediate decisions were being made above their heads, and the repercussions were already in motion. It was a rare, almost cinematic moment. Ordinary employees, used to routine procedures, now witnessing firsthand the power of decisive leadership. The entire room seemed to vibrate with tension, respect, and fear. A combination that left no room for denial. The branch manager, once indifferent, now approached cautiously, his tone careful. "Ma'am, we understand, and we will follow your instructions," he said. But the CEO didn't speak again. She didn't need to. The staff could see the resolve in her eyes, the firmness in her stance, the quiet authority that brooked no argument. Within 10 minutes, it became clear that action was being taken. The branch team responsible for refusing service and creating an unprofessional environment were being removed from their positions, a tangible, immediate consequence of their behavior. The CEO remained composed throughout, aware that the optics of her response mattered. She wasn't reacting out of anger, she was executing a carefully considered plan, demonstrating that accountability could be swift and fair. Her decision sent a powerful message not only to the branch staff but to everyone observing, customers, colleagues, and even the wider public. Leadership isn't just about strategy in a boardroom. It's about decisively addressing injustice when it appears, no matter the size or location. Even as the staff were escorted out, the CEO didn't gloat or show triumph. She stood silently, a calm figure in the eye of the storm, embodying authority, courage, and integrity. She understood that leadership wasn't about revenge, it was about setting standards, ensuring respect, and creating a culture where bias and negligence had no place. By acting decisively, she had transformed an uncomfortable, humiliating moment into a demonstration of accountability and strength. The ordinary branch, once indifferent to professional standards, would now be a cautionary tale, and she had ensured that the lesson was unforgettable. In that moment, the CEO felt an extraordinary mix of satisfaction and resolve. The refusal of service had become more than a personal affront, it had become a catalyst for immediate change, a reminder that leadership is not passive, that power is not just in the title, but in the courage to act swiftly, decisively, and fairly. The execution of her decision was complete, and the message was clear. Professional integrity and respect were non-negotiable, and she would ensure they were upheld. News travels fast when an extraordinary event occurs, and this was no ordinary story. The moment the branch staff were removed, the incident began rippling far beyond the bank's polished floors and fluorescent lights. Social media, the modern pulse of public awareness, quickly caught wind of what had happened, the story of a black CEO being refused service, and then swiftly taking decisive action, resonated with people across the country, sparking conversations about leadership, accountability, and systemic bias in places where it was often ignored. Within hours, the story was everywhere, shared on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook. Each post highlighted not only the CEO's courage but also the stark reality of discrimination that many faced daily. Her calm yet decisive approach became a model of leadership under pressure, a case study in how power and professionalism could intersect to demand justice. Journalists reached out to cover the story. Intrigued by the combination of shock, empowerment, and accountability, headlines like CEO refuses to tolerate discrimination, and, from refused service to immediate action, began circulating, amplifying the narrative and inspiring widespread discussion. People were drawn to the story not just for the drama but for the lessons it offered. Many viewers, particularly aspiring entrepreneurs and corporate professionals, saw in her actions a blueprint for handling injustice with dignity and strategy. The video footage of the confrontation, coupled with her subsequent call to regional management, became a teaching moment for leadership seminars, corporate ethics programs, and online motivational platforms. In boardrooms and classrooms alike, people dissected her actions, analyzing the clarity, calm, and decisiveness that defined the encounter. The incident sparked debates on accountability within corporate culture, challenging organizations to reflect on how employees are trained to treat clients, how unconscious biases are addressed, and how quickly leadership intervenes when standards are violated. Many business leaders praised her for setting an example that courage and action must accompany words. She became a symbol of empowerment, showing that one person's determination could lead to immediate, tangible change, and that professional authority carries responsibility beyond one's own company. Meanwhile, customers and social media users shared similar experiences of subtle discrimination and poor treatment in banks, offices, and public spaces. The story gave voice to frustrations that had long been ignored, and it empowered others to speak up and demand fairness. Memes, opinion pieces, and motivational posts circulated widely, some celebrating the CEO's assertiveness, others discussing systemic reforms that businesses should implement. The narrative became more than a viral story. It became a movement highlighting professional accountability and the fight against bias. News outlets interviewed experts on corporate ethics, leadership, and social justice, all pointing to the CEO's response as exemplary. Some compared the incident to high-profile cases of accountability in other industries, but what made this story unique was the immediacy of her action, the clarity of her decision, and the professionalism with which she handled an intensely personal affront. Even commentators who rarely discussed racial bias praised the story for showing that leadership can be transformative when guided by courage and moral clarity. The wider impact extended beyond media and social platforms, reaching the bank itself. The organization, facing both internal scrutiny and public attention, began reviewing its policies, employee training, and culture. The CEO's actions forced a corporate reckoning, prompting executives to consider how swiftly they respond to complaints and how to prevent similar incidents in the future. Her decision demonstrated that accountability cannot wait, and that leaders, whether in corporate offices or local branches, must act decisively to uphold integrity. As the story continued to spread, it inspired a broader dialogue on empowerment, fairness, and the role of decisive leadership. People admired how she maintained composure, yet acted immediately to rectify the wrong, turning a moment of personal affront into a lesson for thousands. Her courage encouraged others to reflect on their own workplaces, their own decisions, and their own responsibilities in confronting injustice. The impact of her actions was not confined to a single bank or a single branch. It became a nationwide conversation, showing that leadership and accountability are inseparable, and that change often begins with a single courageous choice. The CEO stepped back from the branch counter, taking a moment to absorb the magnitude of what had just occurred. What began as a routine morning, a simple visit to a bank, had transformed into a defining chapter in her life and, unexpectedly, in the lives of countless others. She had faced an affront, been refused service in a moment of subtle but unmistakable discrimination, and yet she had turned it into an opportunity to teach, to lead, and to demand accountability. In doing so, she had not only asserted her own dignity, but had created a ripple effect that would resonate far beyond the walls of that branch. In the quiet that followed, she reflected on the lessons embedded in the experience, the first being the undeniable power of composure. It was her calmness in the face of shock that allowed her to think clearly, to assess the situation, and to act strategically rather than impulsively. Many people in her position might have reacted with anger or walked away silently, but she understood that leadership is most visible in moments of tension, when emotions are high and the stakes are real. By staying composed, she maintained control and projected authority, making it impossible for others to diminish her. The second lesson was about decisiveness. The refusal of service demanded a response, and she chose action over hesitation. Every minute spent questioning, doubting, or waiting would have diluted the power of the moment. Instead, she acted swiftly, contacting regional management, enforcing accountability, and ensuring that the branch staff understood the consequences of their actions. Her decisiveness transformed a potentially humiliating encounter into a demonstration of leadership that was both immediate and effective. Another critical lesson lay in the intersection of courage and principle. Standing up against discrimination is rarely comfortable, and confronting it publicly can feel risky, yet, she understood that courage is not the absence of fear, it is action despite fear. She chose to act, not for revenge, but to uphold fairness, professionalism, and ethical standards, showing that true leadership is not measured by personal gain but by the impact of one's actions on others and the systems around them. The CEO also realized the importance of turning personal experiences into broader lessons. By addressing the incident firmly and publicly, she sparked conversations about accountability, bias, and professional ethics. She had become a catalyst for change, inspiring individuals, organizations, and communities to reflect on their own practices. Her story served as a vivid example that one person's decision can influence culture, raise awareness, and promote systemic improvement. The simple act of refusing to accept mistreatment had, unexpectedly, become a teaching moment for an entire industry. Equally important was the lesson about responsibility. Leadership is not just about making strategic decisions or generating profit, it is about holding people and systems accountable when standards are violated. The CEO understood that her authority carried responsibility, and she wielded it wisely, ensuring that injustice would not be ignored and that those responsible would face tangible consequences. Her actions reinforced the idea that ethical leadership requires courage, clarity, and commitment, even in situations where it is easier to remain silent. Finally, the experience highlighted the value of resilience. Life often presents moments that test patience, integrity, and composure. Her refusal to be intimidated or diminished demonstrated resilience in action. She transformed a moment of personal affront into one of empowerment, showing that obstacles and discrimination do not have to define outcomes, but can instead serve as catalysts for change. The ripple effect of her actions continued to influence conversations about leadership, fairness, and the treatment of individuals in professional spaces. As she walked out of the branch, her presence calm yet commanding, she carried more than the satisfaction of having been right. She carried the knowledge that her actions mattered, that standing up for oneself could create tangible change, and that leadership is ultimately measured not in titles or wealth, but in the courage to do what is right. The story of that morning, once a personal experience, had become a lesson for the world. Composure, decisiveness, courage, responsibility, and resilience are the pillars of true leadership, and each moment presents an opportunity to demonstrate them. In the end, the CEO's encounter at the bank was not just about one branch or one incident, it was about leadership in action, about the power of standing firm when confronted with injustice, and about the impact a single person can have when principle meets courage. Her story became a beacon for anyone seeking to navigate challenges with integrity, reminding the world that real change begins when one refuses to accept anything less than fairness, respect, and accountability.